Alright, this is my 2017 GSXR 1000. I really enjoy this motorcycle, so I wanted to show you a few things I think make it so great. I bought this brand new actually in 2018. It was a holdover model. It had 3 miles on it when I got it, and I chose the red color just because I thought it was kind of neat. You don't see a lot of red Gixxers. So my two main goals with this motorcycle, I want to make it the cleanest, fastest drag bike I can make it while still being streetable, still being able to have a passenger because my wife does like to ride it occasionally, and I don't want to sacrifice things like cornering too much. Second goal is just the longevity of it. I want to keep this thing around, I want to keep it in good shape, so I don't want to do a lot of mods that are going to really negatively impact the life of it to gain, a small amount of power or lose a small amount of weight, something like that. We'll get into that as we go down the list, but okay, so first things first, let's talk about little aero and body mods. Up front here, let's go back. 2017 was the first year for this body style, and so prior to this, the GSXRs all had integrated turn signals in the mirrors, and out back they had the integrated turn signals just in the tail section. For whatever reason, when they changed to this body style, they only changed the 1000s to this body style. They went back old school, so they had the big stocks hanging out the front. They had the big rectangle, orange, gross-looking turn signals, and they had incandescent bulbs in them. There are some of these that came with LEDs, but all the ones that were at the dealership when I went there were just the incandescent ones. And same deal in the rear. They had the big fender hanging off, and it had those big turn signals hanging off of that. So those are the first things that had to go. So up front, we just did some flush mounts, and I went with the smoked ones because I thought it looked good with the black section there. These are from Hot Bodies Racing. I think it cleaned it up a lot, just because it doesn't, your eye's not drawn to those gross things hanging off there, and it's good for aero. Back here, I went with the Yoshimura fender eliminator kit, and just got rid of all that junk that was hanging off the back there. So I really like this kit. I know the Yoshimura one's a little on the high side. It's like 150 bucks, but it is super clean looking and it's sturdy. And on this bike, you have to have some sort of kit unless you're really good with fab, because you can't just cut the eliminator off due to the way it's designed and built into the motorcycle. So I thought this kit was well worth the money. It's got some good looking LEDs underneath it that shine down on the plate. Also, just while we're on the Yoshimura stuff, down here I got the Yoshimura spools. They're about the same price as everything else. Thought they looked cool, so got that. Did the front mirror delete. Got the carbon fiber block off plates from Brock's. These are real carbon fiber, and I don't ride this a ton, so not having the mirrors on the street, yeah, it'd be nice to have them, but I'm used to it and it looks cool. Saves you a little bit of weight, things like 2 pounds, and then you get some aerodynamic gains too. So that was a nice, cheap, easy mod. Okay, suspension wise, here's what we got going on. Up front, I dropped everything down on the forks about 3/4 of an inch. From the factory, the bottom of that gold piece here is basically flush with the top clamp, and you can drop them a little bit more than that. The issue you run into on these forks, and it's maybe a little hard to see in the video, the forks are actually tapered. So if you look, they're a little skinnier here than they are even here. And they go down and are kind of fat in the middle, and then they start tapering back down at a certain point. And that starts at about the point where you'd want to lower it to, which would be about, they're right at like the 1 inch mark. So I tried to stick on the conservative side of things because I didn't want that clamp being on a unparalleled part of the fork essentially and not being able to grip it correctly. So lowered it as much as I thought was safe and going to work out well. And I think it made a huge difference in the appearance of the bike having that gap there instead of the big gap from the factory. One of the mods I'm going to do pretty quickly here is also just buy the strap kit that lets you totally compress the front end, so when you're at the strip, or at the track, whatever, you can take all that balance out of the front end so you're not riding a wheelie the whole way down the track. Also, took the reflectors off right here. I still need to get a little bolt or something that will go in there and look a lot cleaner than that hex thing sticking out. So, in the rear, as far as lowering, I actually bought the Brock's lowering window link. So you can see that's this piece right here. And so from the factory, you just have a metal bar there that's at one height adjustment basically. This lets you turn that turnbuckle in the middle and adjust it wherever you want. So you can drop it, you can keep it at the stock height or drop it down up to 3 inches. I didn't actually measure how much I lowered it in the rear. It was approximately 2 to 2.5 inches. I just set it where it was comfortable for me and where I thought it was going to work the best. And then I've tweaked the rear spring and then your settings on the forks up here to what works best for me. And then along with lowering it, because when you lower it, the angle of everything changes with the factory kickstand. You've got to do something, otherwise your bike's going to be sitting straight up and down and it's going to fall over easily. So I got the Brock's Performance adjustable track stand, and this is the one that will go the lowest. There's 2 different ones they sell. One's for if you're not going to lower it a whole lot, and one's for if you're going to lower it a lot. So this is actually on the highest setting. It's adjustable. You can just put the screw in the different holes over there. But I know once you strap it, I'm going to want to probably have it on a little lower setting. So that's why I went with this one. Okay. So that's about it for suspension. Let's talk about power mods. So from the factory, they claim 200 horsepower. Obviously, that's probably measured at the engine without emissions and all that crap on it. Everything I've seen as far as people actually dynoing these stock, they do about 165 to the rear tire, and that seems to be pretty consistent from what I've seen. The 2 biggest power gains you're going to get on this, and there's a lot of little things you can do, but the 2 biggest ones you're going to get are de-restricting the ECU / tuning it, and an exhaust system. So, on these bikes from the factory, they get a major amount of restriction, and the biggest part of that is there's no direct connection between your throttle and the engine anymore. This is just purely electronic. This has cables going to this, but they go down to a little sensor stuck behind the fairings there. That sensor just sends data communications to the ECU, which is under the rear seat there, and then the computer controls electric motor on the throttle bodies, and it decides how much they open or close. The advantages to that are you get things like rider aids, so traction control, launch control, ABS, all that crap. The computer can do whatever it needs to do to make it run the way it needs to run. Even if you're full throttle, it'll keep you from, popping too big of a wheelie depending on what you've got the settings set at. The disadvantages are the people who like to restrict everything can really restrict it. So, for example, when you go 100% on this, and this is from the factory, your throttles do not open to 100% until you get to like 7,000 or 8,000 RPM. And then they stay at that for about 1,000 RPM, and then they start closing back down, even though you're holding the throttle wide open the whole time. By the time you're out to like red line, 14,500 RPM, they're actually shutting down to like 60%. Well, obviously you're not going to make a whole lot of power if your throttle's half closed at the engine. So the biggest thing is getting the ECU flashed and getting rid of that. Just doing that thing that takes care of the throttle issue to where it actually goes to 100% when you go to 100% is good for roughly 15 horsepower gain at the rear wheel. From what I've seen on the dynos, the videos I've watched of just dynoing, these bikes make about 165 stock. They do just that flash on the ECU, and they'll do about 180. That's a pretty huge gain for not a whole lot of money. It costs usually about $250 to have one flashed like that. Okay, so in addition to that, when you have your ECU sent off and flashed, that's when you can get a tune put in it as well to compensate for things like different air filter, different exhaust, whatever you're going to put in there. Also, they'll tweak your ignition, timing, fuel maps, etc. to get the most out of the bike. So it's going to be your biggest gain. The second biggest gain is going to be your exhaust system. So on this bike, we went with the Brock's Performance Pentacarbon system. It's a full system from engine back. It's all stainless steel. It's super thin, it's super light, and it usually comes in chrome. I got the black electro-coated finish, A, because it looks a lot better on this bike because there's not a lot of chrome on it anyways, and then B, just to protect it from corrosion a little bit more. So the main thing that helps so much is it just weighs a lot less too. I think it saves like 12 pounds or something over the factory system. You don't have the huge catalytic converter that would normally sit, right in about here. And if you've ever seen the muffler on one of these stock, I mean, they're literally the size of a mailbox. They're made of titanium, so they don't weigh a ton, but they're still huge. I mean, they weigh more than they need to. So putting on an exhaust system such as this one is usually good, with the appropriate tuning. It's usually good for about another 15 horse. The videos I've seen of these bikes getting dynoed with this exact setup make about 195 to the rear tire. So I have not had this one dynoed. I will eventually. So your other option for tuning, by the way, is you can have, as long as you've had the ECU de-restricted at least, taken off the emissions crap, you can also use Power Commander, which is what we're running. And then the nice thing about that is if you make changes later on, you don't have to take the ECU out, send it back off. You can, do remote tuning. It's a little easier. So, one other thing while we're on the topic of tuning. So there's 3 models of this motorcycle, or there were in this year anyways. You had essentially a base model, an ABS model, and you had the GSXR 1000R, or some people call it the double R. So the power output, transmission, all that stuff's the same on all 3 models. The only differences, for the most part, are whether or not it has ABS, and then on the double R model, it came with some additional rider aids, it had better suspension on it, and it also came with an up and down quick shifter. Now there are also some cosmetic differences available, that's not what we're talking about, but the up and down quick shifter, yeah, that's a sweet thing to have. So luckily, this one's the base model. I didn't want ABS or any of that other garbage for 2 reasons. A, it's more expensive. B, it weighs more. So get the best of both worlds with this. It's the lightest one, it's the cheapest one. So back to the quick shifter. Luckily, the electronics and everything are already on this bike for a quick shifter. You can even go into the menus on the screen here, and it's got the options to turn the quick shifter on and off from the factory. But when you try clicking on it, it just flashes, it doesn't do anything. So the cool thing is, when you have your ECU tuned or de-restricted, you can have them turn that function on. Then all you've got to do is buy the actual shift rod, and there's a few different companies that make them. I went with this flash tune one. So you just replace literally this rod right here, and it's got this piece in it instead of just being a straight metal rod. It's got this little wire that comes off it. And all this is a sensor that can tell if you're pushing up or down on your shifter there. So when you go to shift, you no longer have to use the clutch, whether you're shifting up or down. And the way it accomplishes that is, say you're shifting up, when it feels a little bit of pressure on this, it kills the spark to the engine, or retards it, just for a few milliseconds, just long enough for the gears to unload and let the shift happen without having to clutch it. Same thing, when you're going down, it can sense that, this is pulling on this, and it actually will rev the engine up slightly to match the revs and let the shift happen without the clutch having to be engaged or getting pulled. And it's really awesome. I mean, I wasn't expecting it to work as well as it does, honestly. It's sweet. So easy to install. I mean, there's just one connector, and it's already up there. You just take you have to take the tank off, but you just find where it plugs in, plug it in, have the tune done, you're ready to rock and roll. So that was a sweet mod, in my opinion. The shifting is so fast with that. Okay. So we talked about power, suspension, quick shifting. that's basically it for, bolt-on parts. The other things I wanted to talk about real quick are just the fluids are running. So I've actually got those over here. When I did the exhaust system, I had to take the radiator off anyways. You don't have to, I guess, disconnect the hoses from it, but it helps. And the bike was approaching 4 years old at that point, so I thought it'd be a good idea to change the coolant. My friend actually talked me into getting this stuff, and I will say it's very slick stuff. I mean, it's supposed to be really good for your water pump, and it's supposed to run a little cooler. So I had an instance yesterday where I finally got to actually, see what the differences would be. This bike runs really cool when you're going down the road. No issues there. And it stays pretty cool in general. But if it's a hot day out, if it's 100 or more, and you're sitting still at a traffic light or whatever, it does start to heat up. And in the past, before I had the engine ice in it, the highest that I ever really saw the temp get was about 215. And the fans would keep everything in check at that point. But since putting the engine ice in, the highest I've ever seen it is about 205, so I would attribute it to that because it's under the same conditions, whatever. But I would say it was worth it. I mean, you have the option of that or the factory stuff, so I don't think it's a big deal one way or the other, but I thought I'd try it out. So then as far as oil, I went with this Allison Pro Drive. They call it the less than zero weight, so it's truly a really thin oil. And I went with this just based off what I saw, Brock's Performance using, and then also Chris Moore. And yes, I was extremely leery about running a super thin oil like that. They also want you to run an additive called Petron in there, and I do run that. I just don't have the bottle still, but that does help thicken it up a little bit, and it's also got some dissolved solids in there that are supposed to help the clutch and just really lubricate everything. But so that's what I run. Seems to be good stuff. I've changed it a couple times with that. Never found any metal debris or anything in the oil when I drain it, so must not be tearing it up too bad. One of the things I have not done to this is a Sprint air filter. They are supposed to be good for a couple horsepower. My biggest issue with them is, like I said, one of my main goals with this is longevity. If you hold one of those air filters up to the light, I mean, you can literally see through it, no problem. It doesn't take a whole lot of dirt to cause a lot of wear on an engine. So, in my opinion, gaining, maybe 2 horsepower to possibly damage your engine is not worth it to me. And same deal like on the chains. Yes, you could go put a 520 chain on this, and you will gain a little bit of acceleration potentially, but is it worth it? Is that chain going to break? Well, I don't know, but it's definitely got a higher chance of breaking, and if that does, chain can wad up, take the case out, whatever. So I try to stay away from mods like that. Let me go ahead and fire it up for you too so you can just hear it. I do really like the tone with this new exhaust on it. One cool thing about this bike too, it doesn't have an actual starter button. It's just like when you put it down here and you just press it once and it goes. So got just about 1,100 miles on this thing. Let me put it in neutral real quick. Got the quick shifter icon there, just telling me that that's on and working. So yeah, it sounds cooler. You can definitely smell the exhaust now. Before, the cat really did its job. You couldn't even smell any gas coming out of the thing. But so that's it as far as the mods. We will be taking this to the track within the next month. Haven't picked the exact date out yet, but I'm really stoked to see what it can do in this form. Hopefully we'll have the straps by then. We'll see what happens. And then I'm going to ride it, obviously, but we're also going to have my friend Caleb. He's the guy who had the black and purple toolbox with the video the other day. He's got a little bit more experience than I do. actually drag racing the thing, so we're going to see what he can do with it too. But stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching.